There are a couple of other things, of course, as well. There are many other things. I've already mentioned the demographic profile and youth exodus stuff, but also Martha Nussbaum, who's from Chicago University, has written very significantly, I think, around the issue of how do we, with globalisation, how do we, with the propensity to move more towards the instrumental rather than the expressive ends of life, that is, the nuts and bolts, mechanical product stuff, rather than relationships, and the seemingly more value are placed to things we can produce rather than relationships we have. How do we keep alive a democratic, secular, open, fair, inclusive society as we ramp up competition and what seems to be happening to me, the rise of individualism and a downplaying of community? And it seems to me, in terms of a leadership challenge and a leadership opportunity, rural communities historically, and this is a little bit of a rosy tint on it, have been quite big on and quite leading in terms of, if we're not in this together, we'll sink. And the idea of relationships and working together and inclusivity. Now, as soon as I say that, I can cite you examples where there is exclusivity, where masculinity dominates femininity, if you like, if I can put it like that, where there's a very gendered view of what roles ought to be and leadership ought to be, and that in fact it's not entirely democratic. But I think overall we could argue that rural communities do provide a rich source of nurturing values like this, which could in fact cascade out further and recapture some of the sense of community that seems to be somewhat expunged by a great focus on competition and individualism and climbing some sort of hierarchical ladder, and then you get to my age and ask yourself, for what? And so what? There are other things as well that you might think about in terms of leadership and management in rural places and spaces. I've mentioned some of those already, so maybe I will pass over the first 3 or 4. But a major issue in terms of leadership in rural communities, because of the proximity that we have to nature, if I can put it like that, and I'm including agricultural practice in nature, is this tension between abundance versus scarcity. Now's not the time for a black dog seminar or sermon, but for example, most of the world's fisheries are on the brink. I mean, when I was a kid, thinking about fish farming was kind of like Dan Dare on the Eagle comic, if anybody's old enough, flying around in space with a rocket on his back, which has all come true. But, the irony of farming fish, when you think about if we just looked after the fish stocks, nature's bounty will just do its job. It won't unless we do something about it. The power and privilege versus poverty and alienation. One of the realities, one of the big challenges for leaders and leadership in rural communities, and indeed for people in small business. And I know many of you, I know of some of your businesses, I don't know many, so I won't make out I do. But they go the extra mile. But what we have overall is a lower demographic in terms of socioeconomic status. That poverty is a big visitor to many people in rural communities. And the capacity to move out of that in some instances is pretty difficult. I've already talked about vibrancy versus opportunism. And of course we've got this massive thing, nature versus development. And I don't know all of the businesses you run here, but one of the things I think rural businesses could do, and many are doing, so don't take this as a judgment in any negative sense, but to ramp up how significant it is, the nurturing of nature versus development. If you want one statistic that you can sort of quote at a Trivial Pursuit night, the earth is covered with concrete and bitumen about the size of mainland China, and from memory it's the second largest country in the world, 9.5 million square kilometres. That's how much concrete and bitumen covers the earth now. And we've got development. I won't talk about the Mount Barker backyard, but I have a view, right? Because one of the things we are doing, right, and whether you're a business leader or just an ordinary Joe Blow like me as a citizen, we know intrinsically, we know in our heart that if we continue to build out on the most fertile of land, it's a recipe for disaster. Homer Dixon, if you don't take my words, read Homer Dixon's book called Upside of Down. I've got a reference in the back, or the downside of up, I forget. It's in the back, on the reference list. What he basically traces historically is when we disconnect from nature, disaster begins to come across our pathway. The disconnect from nature is palpable in some Western communities. And part of the challenge for rural leaders and rural leadership is to do modernity, if you like, business, in the modern, connected IT way, and capitalise on all the benefits of that, but at the same time reconnect and nurture nature so that in fact we do have infinitely sustainable futures. So leaders and leadership, a couple of final points because I think Heather's going to give the gong. You know, there's a whole lot of things that leaders and leaders do. Create, nurture and refine context for learning and growth, whether you're in a business, whether you're in a service, whether you're in education like I am, right? Create and nurture and refine context. That it seems to me in just a few little instances of people talking here that interestingly, so far, I never heard anybody talk about making a profit. You did say it's good for business, and I understand, even I understand, that businesses are not in it totally for charity. But one of the things I think you're also on about is community engagement and capacity building, right? Because you know it's in your interest and your community's interests, and that is a very powerful leadership role, whether you see it like that or not. And in linked with that, of course, is the voice. And one of the things that we're committed to do in this position here is to raise the rural voice in the public domain. It's a hard slog, and I do get on ABC radio and write stuff, and I will not make a noise, so to speak, but it's got to be an informed noise, but it's about voice and change, generating and leading communities, etc. Understand the pervasive forces and superstructures of change and shape and deliver at the local level. I think that's what you're wrestling with here as business leaders and supporters as well as service providers. I guess one way of putting what I'm trying to say in a very hasty way is that corporate city-centric models of leadership are not going to be sufficient to do the job of ensuring that we've got vibrant, productive rural communities and do the job of ensuring that at a national and state and regional level, people understand that and internalise it and act upon it. I think I've been through those, so I won't labour them in various ways. But I suppose number 4, or the 4th star down, it came up a bit in one of the panel sessions, that tension between competition and collaboration. I liked, you got a tick from me, is Sally, is it? Yep, you got a tick from me when she said, I actually talked to my, competitor. And I'm sure other people do in the room. But I think in recent years, collaboration and constructive conversations have been downplayed a bit. And the problem we've got in creating the space for more of this to come forward is that the winners are grinners and continue to win. And I've not quite worked out how you move to another space other than to continue to press hard on that front and in fact to begin to let other things emerge, like locavore, the return to a more nuanced, engaged, localised approach to things without denying yourself the benefits of globalisation and modernity. Okay, I'll leave that. I just want to leave 2 thoughts with you. Only one thing, quickly, Heather. 2 books to read, and we'll come back and have a big conversation. Jonathan Lear's book on radical hope, fantastic book, best book I've read in 2 years, and I kid you not, I read a reasonable amount. What Jonathan did in this book, he's a philosopher and an anthropologist, Chicago University, and he really interrogated what it meant when the last great Crow chief, after all the buffaloes were killed and they could no longer be warriors, this chief uttered these words, and after this nothing happened. And what he does in this is explore what might this mean. And within that he talks about radical hope. And this is a challenge for you as leaders to help articulate what it is, but you don't necessarily, nor do other people, yet have the full understanding of what it is, but you have a sense that we need something other than we've got at the moment. And the very final one, if you've never read anything of Margaret Wheatley, a rather interesting and different view of leadership and the emergence of new ways of operating. She calls it emergence, and what she plays up is not critical mass but critical connection. And it's a more organic approach rather than a mechanistic kind of hierarchically linked way and approach to work things. And without wanting to just give a gong to Heather and the team who organised today, it seems to me that today, as I've been with you, I've been observing something more towards emergence than towards more of the mechanistic, clip together like Lego blocks with no life other than those who do the clipping together. So I hope those few thoughts might be helpful. I'm sorry it's been a bit quick and a bit rambly, but thanks very much for hearing me.